Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today's Thursday, September the 4th. Trust you guys had a good night's sleep, that you're waking up feeling refreshed and ready to seize this new day. We are, as I said, today's Thursday, September the 4th, and we are in the midst of a series called Show and Tell. And we're looking at a passage, Psalm 40. You know, one of the things that we do every day on Seize the Day is open up the scriptures and just spend, a moment together, kind of reflecting on the impact of many of these passages. To keep continuity, the series usually falls through the sermons that we are preaching on the weekends, and then we go a little bit deeper and just pull out some different kinds of applications so that we might, really understand what the scriptures are teaching, because I'm of the opinion that if we understand what the scriptures teach, our life is that much more, our faith is that much more equipped, and we are in a position to be more inspired. And if we find ourselves inspired and equipped, we're going to go out and share what God is doing in our life. And that in a nutshell is our whole philosophy behind Seize the Day. And so I trust that that would just encourage your heart today as we take another look at Psalm 40. And we began by looking here in this psalm, and it was all about learning to wait. We started off the series, right, talking about how we could be in a position where it's so unexpected. We find ourselves like kind of stuck in a like a pit, and it could be waiting for some kind of diagnosis. It could be hoping for a job change. It could be just praying that God would heal a relationship. Whatever it is, it's not a fun feeling, is it? And sometimes it could be even more serious. Like think about, various places within the country, around the world, where these are life-threatening kinds of situations. People could be in the midst of war, right? There could be, violence that has overtaken a neighborhood. I mean, so many ways that you just find yourself so exasperated, really waiting on God to do something great. Well, that's what we find here taking place in Psalm 30. If you been following this along, David, Israel's king, wrote this psalm, and he knew this feeling. Psalm 40 moves from David reflecting on his past and realizing how God delivered him. God, as we saw here, right, in the first couple of verses, God turns to him and hears his cry, lifts him up, sets him on a rock, puts a new song in his mouth. Apologize for some of the noise in the background, but it's a service that's going out here in the neighborhood, and there's not much I could do about that. But it looks like they're going to be going through, and then we'll be in a much better position as we continue. But let me just continue this review, and then we'll start on another topic as we hear talking about just what the implications of the psalm are for us in our everyday. So this idea of waiting patiently, I try to stress that it's not just waiting passively, but waiting is actually something very active. It's like I'm anticipating. I have my eyes open and I am looking to see what it is that God is doing in and around us. There is another part of this Psalm 40 where we begin to see that Psalm 40 verses 4 through 8 is all about God really wanting our trust and our obedience. And yeah, I hate to be fighting over this sound here, but it's getting a little worse. But it'll pass by. This this song it goes into this whole idea of this transition where obedience doesn't end with the heart. Right? It in other words, that God is asking us to be more and more engaged in this work, and this work is going to require us to have listening ears and a submissive will. Kind of like what I'm doing right now, um, and it just shows how much real clout I have. Right, I can't even get these guys to come at a different moment. But hey, such is life. Um, the worst thing that happens is you get a blower in the background. I guess that's not the most horrible thing, but this is what happens when everything's live. You know, bring you into my house, into my neighborhood, and if it's not a dog barking, it's construction being done in somebody's property, or these guys going around still spraying for mosquitoes. So, all right. Well, let's may as well just plug ahead. Psalm 40, verse 9 and 10. Listen to this. It says, I proclaim righteousness in the great assembly. I don't seal my lips, as you know. I don't hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and salvation, and I do not conceal your love or your truth, right, from the great assembly. So here, the experience of David in this psalm is that God has met him in a very trying time in his life. That God turned to him, God heard him, God lifted him, God set him, in a much more secure position. And he says, and that has resulted in a new song that God has placed in his mouth. Think about it. When you go in through some real struggles, you can't help but just like rehearse that over and over and over again, right? Sometimes you even get tired of hearing yourself think. But in this situation now, we find that that has moved to this place where God is still wanting us to be faithful to him. He's still calling us to make sure that what we are engaged in is coming from the heart. God just doesn't want outward obedience. It's not just like some disciplines that I put into my life. If they don't really grab one's heart and move us to a place where we are going to be more focused on his will and his purpose, then don't you see, it's just like going through the motions. And when the tough times come, and they are going to come, you find yourself like saying, hey, this isn't really working for me. Like I wish it was different, but it really isn't. And so moving then from this trusting and obeying, even in the midst while we're waiting for God to do something, it's demonstrating where your heart really is. Because it's easy to love God when everything is going great. It's easy to demonstrate faith when all the struggles are gone. Think about this: when you're in heaven, right? When you're experiencing the fullness of God's kingdom, are you going to need to exercise faith there? No, because everything is you're waiting for something, right? Faith is, as it says in Hebrews, it says faith is the assurance of things not seen, the conviction of things that are hoped for. So think about that. why am I hoping for something in heaven when God says all things have been made new? Why am I going to hope in heaven when when you hope for what you do not have? But in heaven, it, you're going to receive this new body, right? It says our mortality is going to be swallowed up in immortality. The world itself is going to be made new, so will no longer be subjected to decay. So in heaven, there's no faith, there's no hope. There's love, though. That's the language of heaven, and so this idea of trusting and obeying, waiting, these are elements that apply to this experience now. And so that's why God's saying, listen, in the midst when it seems as if God isn't doing anything, I want you to wait. David saying, wait patiently, because God will turn. He will listen. He may not answer our prayers the way we anticipated, but God is going to do something new. God's doing something, really, redemptive. And so I say, okay, well, I will wait. I will demonstrate a faithfulness to God by trusting him and acting in accordance. But notice what else then he says. David says, when all these things happen, I proclaim God's righteousness in the great assembly. You notice, I just want you to take note, right, of what David does and what David does not do. As king, David was responsible, right, to praise publicly. He spoke publicly of God's righteousness, of his faithfulness, of his salvation, of his loyal love and his truth, right? And so David was using his position for good. Um, and notice also what he did not do. David's just saying here, listen, look at Psalm 40, verses 9 and 10. He says, I didn't seal my lips. I did not hide your righteousness. I do not conceal your love and your truth. So God's love, his truth, his righteousness, right? All of these things, it wasn't like this was just something internal. How many times have you heard people say, well, my faith, it's really, it's personal. Well, it is personal in that your walk with God, this is your life, right? This is the way in which I am engaging God on a daily basis. But if God really has a hold of your heart, it's not just about you and Jesus. It's about we and Jesus, because God is using us. He's raising up an army, right? Remember, we prayed just a short while ago in one of the psalms, in one of the passages that we were looking at, where in the text it says, "Pray to the Lord of the harvest that He might send forth workers," and then He tells them to go. So we are the answer to our own prayer, but in going, the intention is that we're also going to be adding to this number, that there are going to be more and more people added into this workforce that is going out into the world as light in the world, and people are going to see their good work, and what's going to happen? They're going to glorify their Father who is in heaven. Isn't that exactly what we found here, David, when he says, listen, as a result of God hearing him, lifting him, setting his feet on a rock, giving him a first place to stand, putting a new song in his mouth, what does he say? Look at verse 3. He says, many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. So all of these things is so that there might be a testimony that goes out before us. See, this is often one of those things that is lacking, I think, a sense of mission. God is calling us for a purpose, and it isn't just an individual thing. It isn't just so that my heart is made full, or I feel better about myself or my circumstance. I mean, all those things are important, But that's not the only thing. God wants us, as I'm writing here to you, right? He wants us to speak up, to share what God is doing. When you find something special and pleasing, don't you want to share what you discovered with other people? I mean, let's say you find a really good doctor, and you love the way this woman or this man, they seem to really listen, and they have a compassionate heart. They're empathizing with your situation, and they want to help, right? Man, you pick up the phone, man. You start calling people around. You tell them, say, "Hey, man, I found this doctor, and she's awesome. I found a surgeon. You gotta talk to him, right? I was having problems with my feet, and I went to this podiatrist. I'm telling you, that guy really understood, my situation and really helped me out. Of course, you would do that. In the same way, if you found a restaurant that cooked really good food, you'd tell all your friends about it. A reliable contractor shows up on time, prices are reasonable, does great work, cleans up after himself. Of course you're going to do that. You're going to tell everybody that's in your sphere, of this thing that you just found. So how much more should we spread the word about God's faithfulness? And so towards that end, I want you to think about this with me. When was the last time you gave God credit out loud? Now, I'm not just saying like in the quietness of your heart, you're saying, "Oh God, thank you for, answering my prayers here, on behalf of maybe family, friends, right? Like, man, God, He He turned to you, He heard you, and He lifted you up out of that circumstance. That's awesome. And you praise Him and you thank Him. But when was the last time you did that out loud? That you actually shared that with people that were around you. That just gave, and not, you don't have to give this, long sermon, but you could, in the course of your conversation, say, you know what, I was in a bad way, and God meant me. And people say, wow, what do you mean? It says, look, I can't explain it all, but what I know is that I prayed and I asked God to come alongside me. And at first it was difficult, and I really didn't feel like He was listening, but look what was happening beyond my awareness. And you know what? Some people will just shake their heads and say, that's just, that's all in your head. But every once in a while, you're going to hear somebody who's going to be a little bit more intrigued, and they're going to want to, either they want to hear more, or what you said is just going to stick. It's not going to let them go. It's going to wind up rattling around inside that head of theirs, and they're going to find themselves sometimes just sitting at a desk or in their house in a chair, and all of a sudden, like the Spirit of God begins to do His work. He'll be sitting there saying, how come you don't have that sense of confidence? Why is it that you get so rattled? Because so and so, it seems like when tough times happen to them, they seem to navigate those waters a lot easier than I do. I wind up being so overwhelmed, that it could be a little debilitating. I don't have that sense of hope. They seem to really believe that God is going to do something for them. You see, those are the kind of conversations that the Spirit of God just begins to pry, begins to open up a person's heart to make them a little bit more, maybe, open to this truth of the gospel. And I love how in this passage that we looked at the other day, when David was in this position. Look at verse 4. When he was in this pit, he says, he recognized this. He says, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. Right? So that means that there is this sense of settledness in David's heart. And David says, I've seen this in other people too. The faithful who are relying on God to do for them what they cannot do for themselves. No, I know. Look, God's given us a will, and He's given us, responsibilities. He's given us authority. I mean, open up the book of Genesis, and what does it say? It tells us that we have been given dominion over this world, that we are to go out and subdue it, to rule over it. And when we do that well, guess what? We take the natural resources, and we better the situation of humanity. We go and we provide fresh water. Those wells didn't dig themselves. Now, God provided the water, but you had to go get it, right? He provides the lumber, but you got to take it down and mill the lumber so you can build your house and heat the stoves, right? And the ingenuity of man looks around and recognizes that there are elements in our society that if we were to use in a certain way, they would make us even more productive. So, hey, we mine, the minerals, and the next thing you know, we're out making steel and bronze and fortifying houses and making all kinds of inventions, planes and boats and and cars and motorcycles, right? Like, so this is something that we all do, but it's not without God providing all this material and all of the skills that we need to be able to go out there and do these things. And so, yeah, I'm going to put my trust in Him because He is the Lord who has provided everything that I see. And so what else does it say here, though? Look at verse 4. It says, I don't look to the proud, right? There are those who are arrogant. I don't need God. I'm doing this all by myself. Really? Till they come to a place where they realize that their money is not going to be enough to change a circumstance. Let a loved one, get ill. And yes, money can pay for great doctors. It could pay for good hospitals. It could pay for medicines. It definitely is helpful. But it can only go so far until that person succumbs to what befalls us all. We find the limit, the limit of our own mortality. And then what? We're staring off into eternity and without a confidence. No, when I read this good news of Jesus, it's meant so that I can face all the various storms of this life with the confidence that if I put my trust in Him, He's going to turn to me. He'll listen. He may not work it out the way I think, because God has a bigger agenda, right? He's going to do a greater work in me. I look back on my life and I realize that, man, there were a lot of circumstances in my ministry that I would, if they asked me, I would have said, yeah, I don't think I want to go along with that. I'll pass on that. There was an old movie with Adam Sandler called Click. I don't know if you guys ever saw that, but he had this special remote that he would be able to fast forward all the unpleasant moments in his life. It was really a sad movie, because the remote, it also was an intelligent remote in the sense that it began to learn something of his responses. And so without him even clicking the button, there came a point in his life that the minute it sensed that things were getting uncomfortable, and they knew that Adam, Sandler would not, like to, persevere through that, it automatically fast forwarded his life, which meant that he was fast forwarding the times of his kids growing up significant moments that were meant to strengthen him and bring people into relationship. And then one day now he's an old man, he's looking back, and it's like a sweater that was just eaten by moths. There are huge holes all over his past. He missed so much because he bought into this fallacy. I just want to escape anything that's painful. But God doesn't give us that option. I had just gotten married, and about 5 months into our marriage, Cindy gets pregnant, and she develops toxemia really badly. So her blood pressure was like 230 over 130, and it was staying high. And no matter what they did, they couldn't bring it down. So that my son Jared was actually born a month early, and she was in distress. So she's not feeling well, and I'm not doing the greatest because I'm wondering where's all this going? What's going to happen to her? What's going to happen to this baby? And then that came around. We were married in at the end of May, and Cindy got pregnant in October. Well, in November, her father is diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and that was a whole nother blow on top of Cindy being sick. Now her father is is dying, and then you fast forward another month or two, and now it's in January of this next year, and I wind up having to confront the senior pastor that I was working with because I had just graduated from seminary. So this is my first real full-time job as in ministry, and what happens? I go and I have to confront the senior pastor because I find out that he's sleeping with his daughter. Yeah, you heard me. It was horrible. And what that did to the church, what it did to the reputation of the church and the community. And I remember sitting in my office during those days thinking, it can't get any worse than this. My wife is really sick. My father-in-law is dying. And now the church has just blown up. I didn't ask for any of this. And I just felt like the Spirit of God just saying, no, you didn't ask for this, but I put you here. So what are you going to do about it? And I remember going into my office thinking, I really don't know what to do about this. I'm all of like maybe 27 at the time, 28. And I'm mystified. And then I remember reading through the book of First Corinthians. And like I felt like the Lord just said to me, look what Paul did. Paul just spent his time addressing some of the issues that were keeping people from making the Lord their trust. Maybe they were trusting in their health, or they're trusting in their circumstances, right? There's a lot of things, but when they're taken away, what is it that ultimately we're going to trust in? Isn't that the story of Job in the scriptures? And you know what? I'm glad I listened to the Spirit, because I began then with Ernest just sharing people those things that I knew that were true about God. Listen, these bodies are going to fail because we live in a world that's broken. This is never going to be heaven. Good people are going to do some really jacked up things because they get their eyes off Jesus. It wasn't Jesus causing all of that. It was that pastor who got his eyes off of Jesus and did something heinous. I'm not excusing any of that, but that wasn't Jesus. And so I'm going to put my trust in him. I'm not looking to the proud, and I'm not going to turn aside to some false gods thinking that they're going to be my remedy. No, Psalm 40 is saying, you're in a pit. You're wondering how to get out. David's saying, listen, when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw God rescue me. And so now I stand in a position where I'm looking forward, and I'm going to see what he's going to do in the future. And God is asking me to speak up, to share these concrete stories about how God has set our feet on a rock. My friends, that's the challenge. In the midst of the brokenness, to recognize that God is for us and not against us, that his word remains true, even in the midst of some trying circumstances. So fix your eyes on him, run with endurance this race of faith, and watch what God does. I've had a front row seat to see him do some miraculous things, not only just in my life, but because as a pastor, I get to hear the stories of so many people whose lives have been transformed for no other reason than they have put their trust in him. And God's given them a platform to share that with family and friends and the circles in which they travel. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining me this morning on this Thursday, September the 4th. Go out, seize the day, my friends, never forgetting that God is good all the time. And Lord willing, we'll finish our week up together tomorrow. God bless you. And I'm looking forward to it.